On a distant, war-ravaged planet, Aelin lay on the cold, cracked ground, her body covered in bruises and cuts. She was an alien from the Tivani race, a proud and ancient species known for their grace and strength. But now, she was nothing more than a broken soul, abandoned by her own people. The Tivani had left her behind, and she had lost all hope. Aelin had once been important, part of a family, part of a people who had long stood at the top of the galaxy's hierarchy. She had been trained to lead, to command, to fight with honor. But that was before the war, before her own kind turned on her. It had all happened so quickly. One moment, she was a promising officer in the Tivani military, proud of her place in the world. The next, she was betrayed. Her mission had gone wrong, and the Tivani leaders had ordered her to be left behind. They said she was weak. They said she would slow them down. And so, without a second thought, they abandoned her, just like that. The sounds of the battlefield still echoed in her mind. Clashing metal, cries of anger, and the harsh rumble of ships leaving the planet. The war had taken so much from her, but this betrayal, it had broken her. Aelin tried to stand, but the pain in her side was unbearable. She gasped for air, feeling the deep wound in her body. Blood seeped from the gash, staining the ground beneath her. She had tried to fight, but there was no one left to help her. The once strong Tivani warrior was now a wounded, forgotten soul. For days, she had hidden among the ruins of the fallen city, too weak to move, too broken to care. She had no food, no water, and no hope. Her people had turned their backs on her, and now there was nothing left to live for. She had given up. The sky above her was dark, filled with the clouds of war, heavy and oppressive. Aelin stared up at the sky, wondering if anyone would ever come for her. But deep down, she knew the answer. No one was coming. Her life, her purpose, had ended here. As she lay there, the last of her strength fading, something strange happened. She heard a sound in the distance. It was faint, almost like a whisper. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But then, the sound grew louder, closer. A ship. It was a ship, but not one of the Tivani. No, this one was different. The shape, the design, it was unfamiliar to her. It was a human ship. Aelin blinked, confused. Why would a human ship be here? Humans and Tivani had never been allies. In fact, they had fought many battles against each other. The thought of a human coming to this ruined world seemed impossible. But as the ship descended from the sky, she knew she was seeing it with her own eyes. The ship landed nearby, kicking up dust and debris. Aelin's heart raced, not knowing what to expect. Was this a trap? Were the humans coming to finish her off? But then, the ship's hatch opened and a figure stepped out. He was tall, dressed in the uniform of a soldier. His face was rugged, but his eyes held something unexpected, a kind of warmth. Aelin couldn't understand why he was here, but she couldn't deny the strange sense of relief that flooded her as she saw him approach. "Are you alive?" The man's voice was deep, but gentle, filled with concern. He knelt beside her, reaching out a hand. Aelin, weak and trembling, could barely respond. Her voice was barely a whisper, but she managed to speak. "Please, leave me. I am not worth saving." The soldier shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Everyone's worth saving," he said softly. "I'm not leaving you here." Aelin looked up at him, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. He was human, just a soldier, just like the ones she had fought against. But something about him felt different. He didn't see her as an enemy. He saw her as someone in need of help. With a final surge of strength, she allowed herself to trust him, just a little. The soldier carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her like she was the most important thing in the world. As he carried her toward his ship, Aelin closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe there was still hope after all. Maybe not everyone had forgotten about her, and maybe, just maybe, this human soldier could give her a chance to start again. Aylin had never expected to find kindness from a human. All her life, she had been taught that humans were unpredictable, wild, and dangerous. They were the enemy, the ones who had destroyed countless Tivani ships in battle. Yet, as she rested in the arms of the soldier who had rescued her, she felt something strange. Warmth. Not the kind of warmth she expected from her own kind, but something different. Something new. The soldier's name was Darius Kane, and though he was from Earth, his heart seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 years of wisdom. As he carried her aboard his ship, he spoke to her gently, though she barely had the strength to listen. His voice was calm, steady, and full of concern. "You're safe now," he said, more to reassure himself than her. "We're going to get you somewhere you can rest. You'll be okay." But Aylin wasn't sure. She had heard such promises before, from people who had left her to die. In her mind, trust was a fragile thing, one that had shattered long ago. Still, something in his words made her wonder. Was it possible that a human soldier, someone from the race that had fought her people for so long, could really care for her? The journey to the ship was brief, but it felt like an eternity. When they finally reached the vessel, Darius carefully placed her on a soft bed in a small, clean room. The ship was nothing like the Tivani ships she had known. There were no grand hallways or luxurious quarters. Everything was simple, practical, designed for survival. The walls were smooth, and the lights above were bright but not harsh. She could tell the ship was old, but it felt welcoming in its own way. Darius stood nearby, watching her closely. He seemed to be waiting for something, unsure of what to do next. But Aylin wasn't sure what she needed. Her body hurt everywhere. Her head throbbed. She felt weak, like the life had been drained from her. "I know you're tired," Darius said, his voice soft as he moved closer. "I'm just going to make sure you're comfortable. I won't leave you." Aylin stared at him, confused. Why wouldn't he leave? She had no answers for him, no words that could explain the storm inside her. Part of her wanted to push him away. But another part of her, the part that had been lost for so long, wanted to trust him. After a long pause, Darius left the room, returning moments later with a small tray of food and water. Aylin watched as he placed it beside her, then took a step back. "You should eat something. You've been through a lot." Aylin didn't respond. The idea of eating felt distant, almost pointless. But she had to admit, the smell of the food was tempting. She had not eaten in days, maybe longer. Slowly, she reached for the bowl of food, her hands shaking. Darius watched her, waiting. He didn't press her to speak or ask for more than she was willing to give. He just let her take the time she needed. Aylin, though still confused and unsure, felt something stir inside her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely alone. This man, this human soldier, was showing her something she hadn't thought possible: care without expectation. As she ate, Darius sat in a chair across from her, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't try to make her talk, didn't try to push her to do anything she wasn't ready for. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Aylin had been through enough to know that trust wasn't something you could force. It had to be earned. After she finished eating, Darius stood and gently tucked a blanket around her. "Rest," he said softly. "We'll talk when you're ready." Aylin didn't know how to react. She felt a flood of emotions: gratitude, confusion, disbelief. Why would a human care so much for her? She was a Tivani, an alien. He had every reason to turn his back on her, just like her people had done. As she lay back against the pillow, her thoughts raced. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Darius had done something her own kind had never done. He had shown her compassion. In all her life, she had never experienced this level of kindness. It was strange, but not unwelcome. She closed her eyes, the exhaustion of her journey finally catching up with her. The last thing she remembered before sleep took over was Darius's face, his expression full of kindness, not fear or hatred. For the first time in days, Aylin allowed herself to rest, her body finally feeling safe in the presence of the soldier who had saved her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but at that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She was not alone anymore. Aylin woke to the sound of soft beeping from the ship's control panel. She opened her eyes and blinked against the bright light streaming through the window. The ship was moving, traveling through the vastness of space. For a moment, she forgot where she was. But then memories flooded back. Darius, the human soldier, the way he had saved her, the warmth she had felt for the first time in days. The pain in her body had lessened, though she still felt weak. Her side, where the wound had been carefully treated. The injury had stopped bleeding, and while it still hurt, it was no longer unbearable. She sat up slowly, noticing that the room around her was quiet. She was alone. Darius had been kind to her, but what did it mean? Why had he saved her? Humans were known to be unpredictable, their actions driven by their own needs. But Darius had shown no fear, no anger, just concern and kindness. Aylin had no answers, only questions. As she slowly stood up, the door to her room opened. Darius stepped inside, his face lighting up when he saw her awake. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice full of concern. He stepped closer, but not too close, as if giving her space. Aylin nodded weakly. "Better. Thank you." Darius smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something different about his expression. Aylin could sense it. A tension, a worry. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Darius hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the window. "We're heading toward a safe location," he said after a moment. "But we're not alone." His voice lowered, his gaze darkening. "The Tivani, your people, they're coming for us." Aylin froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She had known it was only a matter of time before the Tivani realized she was still alive, but she hadn't expected them to come after her so quickly. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would they come after me?" Darius looked at her, his face full of sympathy. "They don't take kindly to traitors. They'll do anything to bring you back. They want to silence you, Aylin, and I'm not going to let them do that." Her mind raced. The Tivani had betrayed her, left her to die. And now they wanted to capture her again. She had no place with them anymore, no purpose in their eyes. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to fight them. She wasn't even sure she could. "What can we do?" she asked, the question coming out quieter than she had intended. Darius's eyes softened as he stepped closer. "We run. We fight if we have to, but right now we get as far away from them as we can. I won't let them hurt you." Aylin's heart warmed at his words, but fear also settled in her chest. Could she trust him? Could she really depend on a human soldier to protect her? The Tivani were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to bring her back. Even if she didn't belong with them anymore, they would still see her as a traitor. They would want to make an example of her. Suddenly, the ship's alarm sounded, loud and urgent. Darius's face hardened, and he quickly moved to the control panel. "They'd found us," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We need to leave now." Without hesitation, Darius grabbed a weapon from the wall and turned to Aylin. "Stay close to me. If they board the ship, I'll protect you. Don't worry." Aylin nodded, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she could do, but she knew she couldn't just sit back and let Darius fight alone. The Tivani might have left her behind, but she wasn't going to run away from her future. She had a new chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The ship jolted suddenly, and Aylin was thrown off balance. Darius grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Hold on," he said. "We're going to make it." They ran toward the control room, where Darius quickly began to pilot the ship. The ship shook again, this time more violently. The Tivani had launched an attack. They were closing in. Aylin's pulse raced. She wasn't sure how to help, but she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She had fought for her people before, but now her heart wasn't with the Tivani. It was with Darius, with the human who had shown her kindness when no one else had. "Get ready," Darius said, his hands flying across the controls. "This isn't going to be easy." Aelin nodded, feeling the surge of adrenaline. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. She wasn't alone anymore. And as the ship raced toward the stars, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with Darius by her side. Aelin had never imagined that she would be here, on a human ship, traveling through space with a human soldier who had saved her life. Everything had changed in a matter of days. The pain in her body was still there, but the fear had faded. Instead, she felt something new, something strange. Hope. The ship had settled into a quiet routine. Darius would spend most of his time at the controls, keeping the ship on course, while Aelin spent hers resting, recovering from the wounds she had suffered. The quiet space between them was comfortable, and though neither of them spoke much, there was a sense of understanding. As the days passed, Aelin began to feel stronger. The pain in her side had lessened, and her energy was returning. Darius took care of her in ways she hadn't expected. Small things, like bringing her food and checking on her to make sure she was comfortable. He had even given her a new set of clothes to replace the torn uniform she had been wearing. She didn't ask him to do these things, but he did them anyway, with no expectation of anything in return. She watched him as he worked, his movements smooth and practiced. There was an ease to the way he handled the ship, a confidence in his every action. Aelin realized that Darius was more than just a soldier. He was someone who had seen the harshness of the galaxy but still believed in kindness. She had never met anyone like him before. To her, humans had always been enemies, dangerous and unpredictable. But Darius was different. One evening, as they sat together in the small dining area of the ship, Aelin finally broke the silence. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice was soft, unsure. "You know I'm not one of you. I'm Tivani. My people betrayed me." Darius didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he continued to stir the food on the small stove, as if thinking carefully about his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words. "I know what your people did to you," he said, "but that doesn't mean you're like them. You're not defined by their actions. You're your own person." Aelin felt a flicker of something inside her. It wasn't just the relief from the physical pain. It was the way Darius saw her, not as a Tivani, not as a traitor, but as an individual. She had always thought of herself as a soldier, a warrior, a part of something larger. But now, in this quiet space with Darius, she realized she didn't need to be any of those things. She could just be herself. "But what do you think of the Tivani?" Aelin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are my people. They are who I was raised to be." Darius looked at her then, his eyes steady. "I've fought against your people," he said. "I've seen what they can do, but I also know that not everyone is the same. There's good in all of us, Aelin, even in people who've done terrible things. It's not about where you come from. It's about who you choose to be." Aelin felt a tear slip down her cheek. It was strange. She had never cried before, not like this. She had always been taught to be strong, to hide her emotions, to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. But Darius had shown her something she had forgotten, that it was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay to feel. "You're not like them, Aelin," Darius added gently. "I can see it. You've been through a lot, but you've survived. And that tells me more than anything." Aelin looked down at her hands, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She had spent so many years believing she was nothing more than a tool, a weapon. But now, here with Darius, she felt like she had a chance to start over. Maybe she could find a new purpose. Maybe she could be something more than just a soldier. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said, her voice barely audible. "My people turned their backs on me. I don't even know where I belong." Darius reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to her than she could express. He didn't say anything at first, just held her hand in his, as if giving her time to think. Then he spoke softly. "You belong wherever you choose to be," he said. "And right now, you're here with me. You're not alone. You don't have to be." Aelin looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had never expected a human to be so kind, so understanding. She had spent so long hiding from her past, from the pain of betrayal and loss. But now, in this moment, she realized that maybe it was time to move forward. Maybe it was time to stop running and start living. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to say. I never thought I would find someone like you." Darius smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything. Just take it one step at a time. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long time, Aelin felt something she hadn't known she needed. Peace. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer felt lost. She was no longer defined by her past. She was free to choose her own future. And with Darius by her side, she knew she would find her way. The days passed quietly as Aelin continued to recover. Darius kept his word, ensuring she had everything she needed. She grew stronger each day, though the doubts that clouded her mind never quite disappeared. She had never imagined herself as someone who could find peace after so much pain. But with each passing moment, her bond with Darius deepened, and the weight of her past seemed a little lighter. Still, Aelin knew that the danger was far from over. The Tivani would not forget her. She could feel their pursuit, even if it was not yet clear how close they were. It wasn't just the enemy that worried her. It was the future. What would happen once they reached a safe place? What would her life look like then? One evening, as the stars shimmered outside the ship's window, Aelin sat by herself in the small common room. The soft hum of the engines filled the silence. Her mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. She had to make a choice, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. She had seen what the Tivani were capable of, their power and their cruelty. Her people had abandoned her, and yet they were still out there, searching for her. Darius had promised to protect her, but how long could he keep that promise? The human soldiers were brave, but they were outnumbered. And Aelin wasn't sure if she could keep running forever. Just as her thoughts began to spiral, the door to the room opened. Darius stepped in, his face thoughtful, his eyes soft. "Mind if I join you?" Aelin smiled faintly. "Of course." Darius walked over and sat down beside her, his presence comforting in a way she couldn't explain. They sat in silence for a moment, both looking out at the endless stretch of stars. Finally, Darius spoke. "Are you okay?" His voice was quiet, but there was a concern in his words that made Aelin look at him. "You've been quiet lately." Aelin sighed, her gaze still on the stars. "I'm thinking about what comes next, about what happens after all of this, after we're safe." Darius nodded slowly, his gaze following hers. "I get it. You're worried about the future. We all are. But whatever happens, we face it together." Aelin turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "But what if we can't keep running? What if they catch up to us?" Darius met her gaze, his eyes firm. "If they do, we'll fight. We won't go down without a chance." Aelin shook her head. "I don't want to fight anymore. I've had enough of war. Enough of running, enough of the lies." Darius was silent for a moment, watching her closely. Then he reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to fight alone. And you don't have to keep running. You've already made it farther than most could ever dream. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together." Aelin felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She wasn't alone. That thought had become her anchor. She had always believed that she was nothing without her people, without the Tivani. But now she saw the truth. She was something more than that. She was Aelin, not defined by the past or the decisions of others. And Darius had shown her that there was a life beyond war and survival. "I don't know what the future holds," Aelin said, her voice soft. "But I know I don't want to go back to what I was. I don't want to be part of a war anymore. I want to build something new. With you." Darius smiled, his expression full of understanding. "Then let's build it. We don't need to look back. What matters is what we do now. And if you're ready, we'll start fresh. Together." For the first time in a long time, Aelin felt the heavy burden of the past begin to lift. She no longer had to be the warrior, the soldier, or the abandoned child. She could be someone new, someone who chose her own path. And the thought of doing that with Darius by her side made her feel braver than she had ever felt before. "I'm ready," she whispered, a sense of peace settling over her. "I'm ready to move forward." Darius squeezed her hand gently, a promise in his touch. "We'll face whatever comes. Together." As they sat there in the quiet of the ship, the stars outside flickering like tiny beacons of hope, Aelin knew that the future was uncertain, and that there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt confident that she wasn't alone in facing them. She had Darius, and he had her. Together, they could find a way forward. The days had started to blur together, one moment following the next in a quiet rhythm. Aelin and Darius had been traveling for weeks, and though they were still far from their destination, Aelin could feel the weight of the future pressing down on her. She had never thought she would be in this position, to have a chance at a new life, to have a future outside of the Tivani War. But now, with each passing day, that future felt both distant and within her grasp. The stars outside the ship's window sparkled with the promise of new beginnings, yet the shadow of the Tivani still loomed over them. Aelin knew that the farther they traveled, the closer the danger became. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. One morning, as the sun rose over a distant planet, Aelin found herself alone in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. Darius had left to check on the ship's systems, leaving her with her thoughts. She hadn't spoken much about her fears, but they were growing heavier with each day. The Tivani would not stop searching for her. They would not forget her. What would she do if they caught up? If they forced her to return, to face the consequences of her betrayal? She had no desire to go back to that life, but the reality of the situation was hard to ignore. Just as the thought crossed her mind, the ship's alarm sounded. Aelin's heart skipped a beat as she turned to the console, her hands moving quickly to check the readings. Something was wrong. The Tivani had found them. The message that appeared on the screen was brief, but its meaning was clear. Tivani ship approaching. Prepare for engagement. Aelin's stomach tightened. She wasn't ready for a fight. She wasn't ready to face her past. The door to the cockpit slid open, and Darius entered, his face pale but calm. He had seen the alarm too. "They found us," he said, his voice steady but low. "It's time." Aelin felt a knot in her chest. "What are we going to do? We can't fight them off. We're not strong enough." Darius didn't seem shaken. He moved to the controls, his fingers flying across the panel. "We don't need to fight them head-on. We can outmaneuver them. If we can get close to that asteroid belt, we might be able to lose them." Aelin nodded, but a part of her still felt uneasy. Even if they managed to escape, the Tivani wouldn't stop hunting them. She would never be truly free. "We can't keep running forever," she said quietly. Darius turned to look at her, his eyes soft but determined. "We won't have to. This time, we'll make a stand. We'll find a way to turn the tables." Aelin could see the resolve in his eyes. He believed in what he was saying, and for the first time, Aelin felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could outrun the Tivani, but even if they couldn't, maybe they could find a way to stand their ground. With the ship heading toward the asteroid belt, they worked together to prepare for the worst. Aelin wasn't sure what she could do to help, but she wasn't going to sit back and wait. She had already seen what she was capable of when she had fought to survive. She wasn't about to give up now. The ship veered into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks, trying to make it as difficult as possible for the Tivani to follow. The ship rocked as laser fire from the enemy ship struck nearby asteroids, sending debris scattering in all directions. Aylin's heart raced as she watched the screen, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. The danger was real now. "They're getting closer," Darius muttered, his eyes scanning the controls. "We have to make this count." Aylin's mind raced. She couldn't think of a plan, but she had to do something. She had to prove she wasn't just a helpless passenger. She had been trained as a soldier, a Tivani soldier. She had learned tactics and survival skills. Maybe she could use that now. "Darius," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I know how to disable their tracking systems. It's something I was taught." Darius turned to her, surprised. "You're serious?" Aylin nodded. "I can do it, but I'll need to get close enough to their ship. If I can access their systems, I can scramble their sensors, buy us some time." Darius hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. "All right, let's do it." They worked together quickly. Aylin directed Darius on how to get as close as possible to the Tivani ship without being detected. The tension in the air was thick, but Aylin felt a calmness settle over her. This was what she was trained to do. She had the skills. Now she had to put them to use. As they approached the enemy ship, Aylin connected to the system and began to work her way through the controls. The tension in the ship grew, but she focused on the task at hand. She had only one chance to make this work. "Come on," she muttered to herself as her fingers flew over the console. Suddenly, the lights in the cockpit flickered. Aylin's heart skipped a beat. Had she done it? The ship shook as they moved closer to the asteroid field, and Aylin could feel the enemy's tracking signal weakening. She had done it. The Tivani ship was temporarily blinded. "We're free for now," Aylin said, breathing a sigh of relief. Darius grinned. "Nice work." Aylin couldn't help but smile back. They had done it. They had bought themselves some time. But even as they celebrated this small victory, Aylin knew the truth. The Tivani would never stop coming. But with Darius by her side, she knew she had a chance. They might not be safe forever, but they could keep fighting. They could make a future of their own. The Tivani ship had disappeared into the vastness of space, its sensors blinded by Aylin's quick thinking. For now, they were safe. But Aylin knew that this was only a temporary victory. The Tivani would not give up so easily. They were relentless, and their search for her would continue. Despite the danger still looming ahead, there was something different in the air now. Something that hadn't been there before. The weight of her past, the fear of the Tivani, the uncertainty of what came next, it was all still there, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. Aylin sat in the cockpit, looking out at the stars. She had spent so much time running from her past, hiding from the Tivani, that she had almost forgotten how beautiful space could be. The stars were like tiny beacons of hope, each one shining brightly in the darkness. They were far away, distant, but they were still there, just like her. Darius entered the cockpit and took a seat beside her, his eyes scanning the starry sky. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her, sharing the quiet moment. After a while, he spoke. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved us." Aylin looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it," she corrected him, her voice steady. "You helped me. Without you, I don't know if I could have done it." Darius smiled, but his eyes were full of understanding. "We're in this together. Always." Aylin felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was more than just his words. It was the way he said them, the way he had stood by her every step of the way. She had been afraid to trust anyone, afraid to believe that someone could truly care for her. But Darius had shown her the truth. She wasn't alone. They had been through so much together, the dangers, the uncertainty, the fear, but they had come out stronger, and more importantly, they had come out together. And that was something Aylin had never thought she would experience. "I don't want to keep running," Aylin said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to keep living in fear. I want to build a life, not just survive. Darius nodded, his eyes shining with the same determination that she felt inside. Then we'll build it. We don't need to run anymore. We'll find a place where we can start fresh. A place where the Tivani can't reach us. Aelin took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. A new life. A fresh start. It seemed almost impossible after everything that had happened. But now, with Darius by her side, it didn't feel so out of reach. She had spent her whole life as part of the Tivani, a soldier, a warrior. But now, she had the chance to choose something else. She could build a life on her own terms. A life of peace. A life with Darius. Where do we go from here? Aelin asked, her voice soft but full of hope. Darius looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet confidence. We go wherever we choose. The galaxy is wide, and we have time. We'll find a place that's ours. No more running. No more hiding. Aelin smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She didn't have to live in fear anymore. She didn't have to be defined by her past. She could create a new future. She turned her gaze back to the stars, the endless expanse of space stretching out before them. There was so much ahead, so much they could do, and for the first time, she felt ready to face it. We'll make it, she said, her voice full of certainty. Together. Darius reached over and gently took her hand in his, a silent promise passing between them. Together, he echoed. As the ship sailed through the stars, Aelin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Darius by her side, she knew they could face anything that came their way. They didn't need to look back anymore. They didn't need to keep running. They had the chance to build something new, something better, together. And that was all that mattered.